Howdy my totally tubular spooky gamers, and we're here for another spooky game ranking video, and today's is going to be on the Fear series. Now Fear stands for First Encounter Assault Recon, and this is a series of spooky or horror first-person shooters. The series was started in 2005 when Monolith Productions released the original Fear, a really solid first-person shooter with a lot of horror elements. The game was very praised by critics and was also a commercial success, enough to where we'd get 2 sequels and 2 expansion packs to the original Fear. However, after Fear 3 came out in 2011, the publisher Warner Bros. Seemingly lost interest in the series. There was a free-to-play online multiplayer game known as Fear Online that came out a few years later. However, this was shut down pretty quickly after it was originally released, and Warner Bros. Has shown no sign of bringing the series back. It's fair to say that the series is dead and dormant, and I doubt we'll see any new games anytime soon, as there seems to be a lack of interest in the IP. But for the people who did play these games, especially back in the day, there is a lot of fond memories with these games, and they're considered classics by most accounts. Fear has really gone on to be a cult classic horror series, with its main antagonist, Alma, the little girl, being kind of iconic in horror gaming. And many gamers who are fans of first-person shooters have fallen in love with the series as well, as it has some superb combat. It really took the whole bullet time slow-mo mechanics of Max Payne and just put it on a whole nother level that had not been seen at that time. And these games absolutely hold up in the modern day. They were impressive then, and they're even impressive now, and I finally played through all of them this year, and I can tell you that in 2021, all of these games have aged remarkably. I would also say that none of these games are bad. There are no bad Fear games. Some are clearly better than others though, and hey, that's why we're doing a ranking video. We're going to be ranking the Fear games from worst to best. We're going to be ranking them based on a couple pieces of criteria. Like the gunplay. How fun is it to gun everything that moves down? How good are the slow-mo mechanics? Is the story total nonsense? How are the levels? How's the flow? Is the game even scary? And as always, let me know whatever's on your mind in the comments, whether you think I'm a total idiot, or your ranking list, or your favorite Fear game, or some fond memories. This is supposed to be a discussion, people. Say something. And as always, like, share, sub. Now, which do I think is the worst, air quotes, of the Fear series? Which one is the weakest? To anyone who's remotely a fan of Fear, you already know, Fear 3 is the weakest in the series. It is the low point of the series, and it technically did kill off the franchise. Despite this, I wouldn't say that Fear 3 is a bad game. I would say it's a very average, middling, mediocre experience. It wasn't even developed by Monolith Productions. It was developed by Day One Studios. The game has pretty much abandoned all horror roots, and I would say this is not a horror game. It is just a straight action game now with a lot of connections to the first 2 Fear games. It takes place after the first 2 Fear games. However, the story honestly is just a jumbled mess. It sees the Fear protagonist, the Point Man, and the antagonist, Paxton Fettel, teaming up to go help their mother, who is Alma, I guess? Yeah, the story just doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially when connecting it to the other Fear games. I guess they just have retconned some stuff from the other Fear games and just done their own thing, and you know what? The less said about the story, the better. But it's not good. When it comes to the gameplay, I guess they saw Resident Evil 5 and how popular the co-op was in it, so they decided to make Fear 3 a co-op based game. And I can definitely say that if you're not playing this game in co-op, you're going to have less enjoyment by default. The game is a pretty standard early 2010s first-person shooter with all the staples that you have come to know and love from games of that era, like lots of cover, breach and clear, regenerating health, and the game does have the Fear aspects. You still do get the bullet time, the slow-mo, the cool kills, the explosions. It's very linear and has a kind of edgy feel to it, especially the Point Man. He looks pretty different from how he used to. He's pretty edgy now. I do think the gameplay is pretty solid though. It is pretty alright, I mean, especially for the time, but it does feel a bit generic in a number of aspects. The environments are very dull and drab for the most part, and the gunplay can, well, at first glance, it doesn't look all that exciting. It looks like what you would expect from a game that came out in 2011. For being 10 years old, yes, 10 years old, the game actually looks really good even nowadays. And playing in co-op, it is a really good time. When you play as Fettel, it's much more exciting, where you get to take control of people and throw shit around. And it's where the most enjoyment is had, playing as Fettel or just playing cooperatively in general. It's to the point where I would say if you're not playing cooperatively, I can't really recommend the game, but it is a good co-op experience. I do think that Fear 3 is a little overhated. Yeah, it did end the series, but it's not as bad as some people will leave you to believe, and it's a fine enough first-person shooter. But I won't deny it when I say that the other Fear games are quite a bit better than this one. Our next game is Fear Perseus Mandate, the second standalone expansion created for the original Fear. And this isn't all that much better than Fear 3, but it is a fine little expansion. The story takes place after Fear 1 and Extraction Point and is very generic. It just sees you as a generic soldier basically just coming in with another Fear team to take on the replicas and ATC security forces. Things aren't all as they seem though. The story is very generic, it's bland, it doesn't really go anywhere and do anything interesting for the Fear franchise, and I guess it's technically not even canon because Fear 2 basically just goes right over this game. You're probably not here for its weird, pretty generic story. You're probably here for more Fear 1's gameplay. And yeah, you do have Fear 1's gameplay here. However, when it comes to Fear and its 2 expansions, this is definitely at the bottom of the list. It does have a lot of the things that made Fear 1 great, such as the slow-mo. The slow-mo is great, and it looks great. The cool explosions, the fun weapons, and the kung fu shit is all there. However, it really just feels like a retread of the first Fear, and it's nowhere near as good as that or the first expansion. Instead of primarily fighting the soldiers with a really good AI, you fight these mercs that are just nowhere near as smart and are nowhere near as fun to fight. They feel very generic and phoned in. And I just didn't have very much fun fighting them. And when it comes to the weapons, all of the weapons from Fear 1 are great, but they introduce a few new ones here, and they're just really generic, and they just don't feel anywhere near as good as the ones from Fear 1 or Extraction Point. And a lot of the levels are actually just reused from Extraction Point and the original Fear. Some of them have you just going through the level backwards even. The next thing to bring up would be that there's something wrong with the lighting in this game. Now, Fear 1 and Extraction Point have great lighting. The games looked fantastic for the time. This game still looks pretty good, but the lighting, there's something wrong with the lighting here. And in the end, Perseus Mandate just feels like it's phoning it in. It fails to improve on the Fear 1 formula at all. It's just a retread of the previous game and its expansion, and any new ideas introduced are just not very good. The game was still relatively fun. It tries to at least be scary once or twice, but it definitely is not as good as those expansions. I would say it is slightly better than Fear 3, and I can only recommend this game to like die-hard Fear fans. If you really loved that first game and its expansion, go ahead and try this. It's more of the same, but that's all it is. More of the same. Our next game is Fear 2, released in 2009 by Monolith. It takes place after Fear 1 and sees a Delta Force named Dark Signal deployed to take some corporate goon into custody. You play as a new character named Beckett and are just trying to get that corporate stooge when all of a sudden your squad is attacked by an adult Alma, and it's up to you to figure out just what the hell is going on. Like most Fear games, the story is kind of all over the place. It makes more sense here than the previous 2 games on this list, but it still is kind of, yeah, it's just kind of all over the place. I think it was still alright though, but the ending is very weird. Outside of the story, I think Fear 2 is actually a pretty good game. It is a pretty great first-person shooter. The shooting is still fantastic and is very visceral. The guns feel and sound great, and gunning people down, it just feels really nice and it's quite satisfying. It doesn't get as crazy as Extraction Point might get, but I still really did enjoy every time I was in a firefight in this game. The slow-mo is really cool, the explosions are great, the kung fu is there. It was more than engaging, and I thought that the entire game was really well paced. It never got boring or slow or repetitive, and they were able to keep things pretty varied. One way they do keep it varied is with these mech sequences. I could really do without these. I don't think they were all that great, and a bit weird for a horror game, air quotes, but I mean, they at least made it varied. Despite those, I thought the atmosphere of the game was actually pretty solid. It was much better than the last 2 games I just talked about, and the game does try to be scary a few times. Whether or not it actually is a different story, but it does try. I can definitely feel its foreboding atmosphere, which is something I couldn't say about Fear 3. Now, I think this game is also a little overhated as well. I mean, it's not perfect, it's not the greatest first-person shooter, it's not even the best Fear shooter, but I think it is still a really solid game. And there was even a DLC released for the game. However, this DLC is like less than an hour long. It has you playing as some generic clone, and they actually just reuse Fear 1's music. I really don't know why this was even released. Now, Fear 2 I can absolutely recommend to fans of first-person shooters, and if you like horror games, or at least the horror aesthetic, you'll probably find some enjoyment with this game. Our second best Fear game is Fear Extraction Point. This is the expansion to the original Fear, taking place right after. You still play as the point man and you deal with the fallout of the ending of the first Fear game. The story, like Perseus Mandate, I guess is not canon, but the story doesn't really do all that much anyway. It was just kind of there and a means to an end. The gameplay is basically, what if we took the original Fear, shortened it down, cranked it up a little bit, and just made it a bit more crazy, because that's what this game is. Everything that was great from the first Fear returns, all the great weapons, the great slow-mo mechanics, the in-depth environments, the really solid gunplay, and the smart AI. There are a few new weapons to play with. These are actually really fun to play with, and I thought that they fit into the world pretty well. And they give you these weapons really fast. The first Fear, they really slowed down the weapon progression. They gave it to you over time. Not this game. They give you all the weapons pretty much immediately, as it does take place right after. They assume you played the first game, and the gunplay continues to get even crazier and crazier. And it's just as great as it was in the original Fear. You feel like a total badass as you go into slow-mo, kill a bunch of dudes, and blow shit up. You even get to do even more kung fu shit. Like, playing through this game was a blast. I had a really good time with it, and I really just sat down and played through this game in like 1 or 2 sittings. But one reason I was able to do that is because, sadly, the game isn't that long, and it really left me wanting more. The game is on the shorter side, and I really think that it could have done better with even more to it. And even with it being on the shorter side, the game seems to reuse levels and pretty much all the environments from the first Fear game. In fact, a few of these levels are just straight like copied and pasted from the first game. The game is still very engaging, and the gunplay is just as satisfying as ever. I would say the gunplay is honestly better in this game than it was in the original Fear. I will say the game is not as scary as the original Fear, though they do try to go for a little bit more scares, but they're in much more scripted sequences, and I just don't think the game is anywhere near as scary, and I thought the atmosphere was just not really there when compared to the first game. But I know there are plenty of people that think Extraction Point is the best of the Fear games and better than the original game, and I can totally see why. It's just not what I think is the best Fear game, but I have no problem saying that it is a great game, and I have no problem recommending it to anybody who likes first-person shooters or horror games. It's like almost a must-play. And I think the best Fear game is the original Fear. I think the original Fear is a fantastic game in just about every aspect. I think the original Fear just kind of got everything right with superb gunplay, a great atmosphere, being actually scary, a pretty decent story, and the game looked amazing for the time. The story is actually pretty interesting. It has you playing as the point man, so it does take place in the future where a military contractor known as ATC has developed an experimental unit of telepathic controlled clones that are super soldiers known as the replicas. However, their psychic commander Paxton Fettel goes rogue and takes control of them, seizing control of the headquarters in Washington. So your squad is sent in to stop this crazy psychic dude, and he has a lot of these super soldiers that are ready to take you out, and there's this mysterious little girl that also plays a part in the whole series. Out of all the stories in the Fear games, this is easily the best one. It is the most fleshed out. It makes the most sense. It has actually some pretty interesting lore. I like where it goes, and I quite like the ending. I just genuinely really like the story of this game. The atmosphere is fantastic. The vibes you get while playing this game have never really been replicated in the series again, and one reason the vibes are so great is the game has downright artistic lighting. It is superb in this game. The graphics were fantastic for the time and just look great. There was a real attention to detail when it came to these environments, and the way everything reacts to the player is just superb. The big gimmick of the game was the fact that it has superb shooting that allows you to go into slow-mo Max Payne style, and it just looks awesome. The gunplay is some of the most satisfying gunplay you'll ever find in a first-person shooter for a variety of reasons. All the guns are great. Not only do they look great, they feel great, they sound great, but they're just excellent to use, and fighting the AI is incredibly engaging. This is some of the smartest AI you'll find in any first-person shooter. People have gone back over the years to say and realize how smart the AI is in the original Fear. It's great. They are really able to pose a challenge to you. The gunplay is just very visceral. It feels very raw and chaotic, and blowing shit up with the grenades in slow-mo, it will literally never get old. There's some kung fu stuff you can do that makes it look even more badass, and when you're just going through a hallway, an office hallway, just blowing everything up, blowing the chairs down, paper, shit's flying, particles are all over the place, and the lighting's out of control, and everyone's dying, there's just nothing like it. It is superb. And then when the game slows down and tries to actually be scary, it's able to do that. It has some really good jump scares in it, and it has a really tense atmosphere that's really foreboding and really unique. They really got the lightning here, and as you can see with the rest of the series, the lightning just never really struck twice, as I think the original Fear is a superb game that just did everything right. It's one of my favorite first-person shooters of all time, and I have no trouble recommending it to anybody who likes guns, shooters, horror games, all that stuff. It is a classic for a reason, and I really think that if Fear was going to come back, they would probably want to re-release this game, or at least do something with this original game, because this is just like a master class of the first-person shooter. Monolith were really on their A game when they made the original Fear, and I just don't think it ever got any better than that. This is arguably Monolith's best game of them all, which is actually saying a lot, and yeah, I just had a really fun time playing it. I've always really liked the original Fear, and I'm glad that I was able to talk about it in some capacity. If you made it to this part of the video, please tell me what your favorite Fear is. Would love to know. And that's it for this video. I really like the Fear series. Hope it comes back in some capacity, but either way, hope everyone has a great night. See you later.